Hello, Queen. I am Lord Nelson. I have been raised from the dead.
Hello, I am surprised by your reincarnation. It is a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Nelson.
It is Lord Nelson to you, Queenie.
How rude.
I am sorry. I had actually come to tell you a little about the Vikings.
Would it not have been more appropriate that Eric the Blood Axe came to tell me?
He was not available to come back to life, so I have come instead. I hope this is okay. I was a seafaring man, so understand the routes that the Vikings took on their quest for gold and treasure. Is it okay for me to enlighten you to the invaders of the north?
Yes, I would like that very much.
The Vikings invaded between the mid-7th century until 1000 AD. They robbed and pillaged monasteries around the northern coasts of England.
Were they nasty and violent people?
They were a farming community. Their farmland was poor and so were forced to find other places to settle. They were amazing boat builders and created very useful ships. They were able to cross the sea with these special ships that they made. They were the first people to develop this skill.
Is that why the English have been such good sailors and had the most powerful armies at sea since the Vikings?
That is a possibility. The Battle of Hastings was won by the Normans, who gained control of this country.
What have the Normans got to do with the Vikings? They were French, were they not?
Good question, Queenie. Norman means northern men in French. At the time, the French were very powerful. They saw that the Vikings were ferocious and so gave them land in France to settle. This made peace between the French and the Vikings. So the Normans were actually Vikings.
That is very interesting. What did the Vikings do before the Battle of Hastings then?
Another very good question, Queenie. The Vikings were farmers. When the farm work was not needed during the summer months when the crops were growing, the Viking men left their homes and invaded the northern coast of England. There were many monasteries on the coast at that time. The Vikings could come from the sea and invade these monasteries.
So the Vikings robbed the monasteries?
That's right. They killed the monks who lived there and took all the treasures.
They settled in England also, did they not?
Correct. As the Vikings invaded our shores, they saw that the land was good. They brought their families over to settle. They did not invade as there was enough land for everyone.
Is that why there are many places in the northeast and northwest of England that have place names which come from Viking words?
That is correct. These places have the words sounding Thor or by. It is likely that any place names near you that have these sounds in the name will have Viking origins.
Interesting. Did they invade the south coast at all?
Not as much. The Saxon people were very strong at the time. There was a line across England that goes from London to around Birmingham. North of this line was called Danelaw. This was Viking territory. South of this line was the Saxon community.
You know a lot about the Viking people. I know that York was a place where the Vikings settled.
Yes, right again, Your Majesty. York was a strong city. The Romans had built a fortress there when they occupied England. York was a strong position to hold. When the Romans left, English people occupied it. The Vikings attacked the city and took over the walls. There is a street called Coppergate. This street was a Viking settlement within the walls of York. It was a stronghold which gave protection against outsiders. There is a river that runs through the city to provide food and water. The Vikings could use the river with their special boats to gain access to the sea. There is evidence from digs on this street that show us what a Viking village would have looked like.
I have been to the Jorvik Centre on Coppergate Road. It is an interesting museum. The excavation of the village is there for everyone to see.
That is right.
Where else did the Vikings go in their ships?
There is evidence around the Mediterranean that the Vikings visited there. They traded with many rich countries, including the Persians. It is well known that the Vikings were the founders of America. They called it Vineland. They also settled in places like Greenland and Iceland.
How interesting. What were the houses that they lived in like?
They were not like your home, Queenie. There was only one room. The windows were very small. This was to keep the heat in. Some houses were covered in grass for insulation. The walls were made of wood or mud and straw. The Vikings used wattle, which were woven sticks. Some Vikings had larger houses and kept their animals with them. This provided extra warmth.
Yui, that sounds smelly. Did they have electric showers and central heating?
Not at all. They had a fire in the middle of the home where they cooked and gained warmth from. There was no electric or gas. The only gas came from the animals' bottoms.
That does not sound like anything I am used to.
I am sure. The Vikings were very good at dividing their land. They had fences to show where their land was. The Viking people were good blacksmiths and craftsmen. The women helped cook and look after the children. They also helped with the animals and farming.
Did the Vikings have gods?
Yes, the religion was a main part of the life of a Viking. They believed in a big story of gods. The main god was called Odin. He had an 8-legged horse. Thor was another big god. He was the god of thunder and war. They believed he had a special hammer that returned to him when he threw it. Freya was an important god. She was the goddess of love. Viking people believed in a place called Valhalla. This is a place the heroes of the battlefield would go. They were taken by Valkyries. The Valkyries were angels that looked for the dead on the battlefields.
Sounds exciting.
Yes, the Vikings were not scared of death in war because of this. This made them a very scary enemy.
Were there kings and queens during the Viking era?
There was kings later in the Viking era. There were clans of Vikings and each clan had a leader. Later in the Viking period, an important king lived in York. He was called Eric the Blood Axe. He was a scary foe.
The Vikings were a very interesting people. They had a big influence on the modern world, and more importantly on boat designs. England was shaped significantly by the Vikings.
Yes, the English have been influenced from the Scandinavian countries. These countries also became influenced by the British culture. The Vikings became part of our culture and took it home with them.
I have heard about this. There is evidence in Scandinavia that the Christian culture began to develop there near the end of the Viking era. The Vikings were not destroyed but more diluted into many cultures around the world.
Excellent. You know your history, Queenie.
It has been a pleasure speaking to you, Lord Nelson.
Yes, it is time that I must once again leave this world. Before I go, could I ask you to stop all the pigeons pooing on my head in London? It upsets me when I see this happen.
I will do my best, Lord Nelson. It has been a privilege to speak to you and I have learned so much about the Vikings. Thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye, Queenie, and the rest of you watching. It has been a pleasure speaking to you all. Thank you.